All right, let's talk about standards. And so the Georgia Standards of Excellence is what obviously you use in the state of Georgia. And it is the standards that we use when thinking about what the state expects students to know at each grade level. So they help they help teachers determine what they are expected to teach for each course. And so it should only be a guideline. It is not the only determining factor of what students need to know for each grade, but it is very useful in understanding what topics, what issues, what bigger level notions of literature and writing that students need to understand. They are based on the Common Core State Standards, CCSS, and so they're called the Georgia Standards of Excellence because they are in some ways tailored to what students in Georgia need to know, but they are strongly based on Common Core. Um, there's no proper way to plan with standards. Some teachers like to start with standards, put it into a scope and sequence or matrix of everything that they're going to cover throughout the year. Other teachers just plan using specific texts and writing skills that they want to do, and then they go back to the standards afterwards. There's no proper way to plan with standards, but you do need to attend to them because it is the expectation of what students will need to know by the end of a year. Obviously, a big part of this is that it helps determine what will be on the end of a standardized test, but we also don't teach just towards a standardized test. And so, while yes, it is a guideline, it is something that is going to be important that you need to attend to and make sure that you are hitting on each standard, each in the entire course. It is not the only determining factor of how you need to be teaching your lessons. So, if you go to the website for the Georgia Department of Education, you will find that there is a way to get all the PDFs for each course in English Language Arts, as well as any other course that is tested, and under that provision within the state and expectations that have these standards. And so, what I like to do typically is every time I hit a standard in my lesson plans, I check it off. And so you might download that PDF and check it off every time you hit it, because then you'll get to see how often you're hitting each standard, and then also you'll be able to determine a little bit of which ones are getting hit often and which ones don't get addressed quite often. And so if you look actually at the website, we'll look over here. You can see you just Google Georgia Standards of Excellence. You can click on and find the website here, or you could go down here to English Language Arts. You can see there's a tab here as of today. You go right here to English Language Arts, click on that, and then you can go through whatever grade it is. Since our lesson plan is 8th grade, I'll go to 6th through 8. And then you can click over here to expand what these standards are. So they do provide you with some other resources. If you're just looking for the standards, however, you click there and the PDF will open up. And these are all the standards you'll need to know for grade 8, for example. And so they break it down into reading literacy over here on this column, as well as reading information. So informational texts, and this is going to be your fictional texts. And then here are your writing standards. And then, of course, English also has speaking and listening standards, language standards, and then this is a way to sort of cover, this is a big picture of how they break down by grade. And so you can see there's a continuum here, is that just because students learn about the function of nouns, pronouns, verbs, grammar stuff, it doesn't mean that just because they learn it in 3rd grade doesn't mean it stops there. It's something that should continue on all the way to 12th grade. So again, some pretty useful charts here, and the way it's organized is pretty useful, but as I mentioned, I print this out, and every time I accomplish a goal or I teach a standard, I simply put a check mark next to it, and it tells me that I've covered it, and at least I've tried to address it. And you might also leave a note how successful you've been. And so if we look back over here in thinking about how you might plan with your standards, what we're going to ask you for your lesson plans is to put both the code here. So I don't know what the codes are by themselves, and so I also require the explanation next to it, whatever the definition of this particular standard is. So cite the textual evidence that most strongly supports an analysis of what the text says explicitly, as well as inferences drawn from the text. And so they're drawn pretty broadly, and so it will require you to break it down and understand exactly what we might mean by finding textual evidence, but we can see that when we're reading chapters 1 and 2 of The Giver, this standard directly relates to what students are doing. If we look over here with engaging effectively in a range of collaborative discussions, that's a little bit more broad. And so whenever students are actually having whole class conversations or working with their peers in small groups, I typically would throw in something like this in order to say that we've touched on the ways in which we effectively engage in a range of collaborative discussions. And so even though this might not be tied directly to specifically to an objective that I wrote, it is still something that we're touching on and incorporating within a lesson. So again, you might start with your standards on a daily basis with planning, or you might plan out your lesson and then return to your standards and plop these in after you've already identified your objectives.